Okay, so let's get right into it. When you think Smithsonian, you probably picture those iconic, massive museums on the National Mall in DC, right? It's basically America's attic, just stuffed with treasures. But the story of how it even exists? Well, it's one of the weirdest and most fascinating tales in all of American history. Just look at this number for a second. 157 million. That's the mind-boggling number of artifacts, artworks, and specimens that the Smithsonian is responsible for. It is, without a doubt, the biggest museum complex in the entire United States. But here's the real kicker, the question that gets this whole story started. How on earth did the United States get this huge, iconic institution, this symbol of American knowledge, from an inheritance left by an English scientist who never, not once, even stepped foot in America? It's an incredible historical puzzle. And to solve that puzzle, we've got to start with the man himself and what has to be one of the most mysterious bequests of all time. So this is James Smithson. He was a pretty well-respected scientist, even a member of London's fancy Royal Society. But here's the thing. He was the illegitimate son of a duke, which meant he could never inherit his father's title. And that seems to have really bothered him his whole life, giving him this deep desire to make his own name, the Smithson name, live in the memory of man. So in his will, he made this absolutely wild stipulation. He said that if his nephew died without any kids, his entire fortune, every last penny, would go to the United States of America. Why? To build something in Washington for the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. I mean, it's a huge, ambitious goal, but it's also incredibly vague. What does that even mean? And you know what? It took a long time for anybody to figure that out. Smithson dies in 1829. His nephew dies childless just 6 years later, and suddenly this fortune belongs to America. In 1838, after a whole legal battle, 105 sacks packed with over 100,000 gold coins show up in New York Harbor. But even then, Congress spent another 8 years arguing about what to do with it. Some politicians were actually suspicious, thinking it was some kind of British trick. All of this confusion led to the Smithsonian's first big identity crisis. What in the world was this new establishment for knowledge supposed to be? This whole mess led to what one writer at the time called a cabinet of conundrums. Now, to really get the debate, you have to remember what museums were like back then. The most popular one, by far, was P.T. Barnum's American Museum in New York. We're talking 5 stories of a head-spinning variety of curiosities and wonders. It was part science, part total sideshow. The early Smithsonian, with its serious exhibits on minerals and barometers, had to figure out, was it going to try to compete with that? The public was, let's just say, a little confused and pretty amused by this new, very serious National Museum. Right after it was founded, a humorist in a New York newspaper published a satirical list of things he thought should be in the collection, and it perfectly captures the public mood at the time. Just look at these suggestions. They're all puns, plays on common phrases, like a pound of butter from the cream of a joke, or my personal favorite, a musket and powder horn of a shooting star. It was a popular kind of humor back then, and it just goes to show that nobody really knew what to make of this super serious scientific institution being built in Washington. But, of course, the institution did find its way. It moved from this world of puns and jokes to the absolute forefront of scientific discovery, and it really started to live up to that mission. In the end, the vision of scientists, like its very first secretary, Joseph Henry, won the day. The Smithsonian was going to be all about serious research and science. It was going to focus squarely on that first part of Smithson's mission, the increase of knowledge. And that commitment to research, the one they decided on way back in the 1840s, has a direct line to some of the most mind-blowing science that's happening right now. Get this, a team supported by the Smithsonian, using the James Webb Space Telescope, just revealed that the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy is constantly erupting with flares of light. Think about that. From a vague 19th century will to literally mapping the behavior of a black hole, that is the increase of knowledge in action. So what about that second part of the mission, the diffusion of knowledge? Well, today, that's handled through these massive educational programs. In 2025 alone, the Smithsonian Science Education Center reached millions of students and worked with educators in thousands of school districts, not just in the US, but in over 100 countries. But this mission isn't just standing still. The Smithsonian is always growing, always trying to tell more stories. But with that growth comes a whole new set of very modern and very, very expensive problems. So back in 2020, Congress gave the green light for two brand new museums to tell even more of the American story. One all about American women's history, and another focused on the American Latino experience. Here's the catch. Building on the National Mall has gotten incredibly expensive. If you look at the inflation-adjusted costs of the last two museums they built, you see a huge jump. The price tag nearly doubled from the National Museum of the American Indian to the National Museum of African American History and Culture just 12 years later. So what does that mean for the next museums? Well, based on past cost overruns, the African American History and Culture Museum cost 38% more than they first thought. Each of these new museums could easily top $1 billion. That is a staggering amount of money. And this brings us right back where we started, a debate over what the Smithsonian is even for. The conundrum is back, but this time it isn't about silly jokes and curiosities. No, this time it's about politics and the American story itself. See, the fundamental question today isn't just what belongs in the nation's attic anymore. It's about how those objects get presented, and maybe more importantly, what kind of story a national museum is supposed to be telling. This whole debate really came to a head in March of 2025 with an executive order. It basically argues that the Smithsonian has been influenced by a divisive, race-centered ideology, and that its true mission should be to act as an uplifting public monument. The order actually points to specific examples to make its case. For one, it brings up a graphic from the National Museum of African American History and Culture that reportedly labeled things like hard work as elements of white culture. It also mentions an exhibit that claimed sculpture was used to promote scientific racism. These are the controversies right at the heart of today's debate. So here we are, full circle. Back in 1846, the big question was whether the Smithsonian should collect scientific tools or, the cap of a climax. Today, the question is about how to tell America's story. Is a national museum's job to be an uplifting monument, a critical historian, or something else entirely? The debate over James Smithson's mysterious gift, it is far from over.